Continuamos en el segundo foro internacional La innovación en la justicia, organizado por México Evalúa y la Fundación Friedrich Naumann para la Libertad. Les invitamos a interactuar, compartirnos sus comentarios, sus preguntas a través del sitio oficial del foro innovacionenlajusticia.mexicoevalúa.org y a través de las redes oficiales de México Evalúa en Facebook, Twitter, Instagram y YouTube, utilizando el hashtag Innovando la Justicia. Vamos a continuar las actividades del día de hoy con el siguiente panel, denominado Justicia Climática, la responsabilidad de los tribunales. Este panel estará moderado por Anaid Velasco, gerenta de investigación del Centro Mexicano de Derecho Ambiental, CEMDE. Participarán Celeste Gabriela Cedillo González, catedrática de la Universidad de las Américas en Puebla, Gabriela Renata Terrazas Tapia, vicepresidenta de Oceana México, y Froilán Hernández Ruiz, Senior Attorney de The Nature Conservancy. Los temas que se abordarán serán justicia ambiental, ética y política, discriminaciones de comunidades dependientes de recursos naturales, así como procuración e impartición de justicia ante delitos ambientales. Le cedemos la palabra a Anaid Velasco.
Crimes. Now we give the floor to Anaid Velasco. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this panel on environmental justice. As I'm going to introduce our guest today, Dr. Gabriela Celeste Cedillo Gonzalez. She is doctor in political sciences by the National University in Mexico, and her main lines of research are environmental geography and the policies of observation in Mexico, as well as the environmental governance and preservation applied to the concepts of criminal justice and natural resources. She is a full-time professor and researcher in the Department of International Affairs and Political Sciences in the University of Americas in Puebla. Welcome, Celeste. And we also have Froilán Hernández Ruiz. Froilán is a lawyer by CIDE. He has a master in public law from the University of Pennsylvania in the United States, and he is a senior lawyer for the Northern America. And finally, we have Renata Terrazas Tapia. Renata has a major in political sciences by the National Autonomous University in Mexico. She also has a master's degree from Berkeley, California. She has more than 10 years of research, and she is in San Luis, in Jornada San Luis. And right now she is vice president of Oceana Mexico. Welcome, all of you. We are in this panel to address the topic of climate justice, which is a topic that is more familiar to us. In the last few years, it has become more apparent because climate justice is a concept that is established in an issue of responsibilities and human rights, where starting with the effects of climate change, it has been discovered that usually people that are more affected by these impacts on climate change are those that have the least responsibility in the problem. This means the people that issue the least amount of greenhouse gases are the ones that suffer the greatest consequences. And therefore, climate justice addresses a great amount of principles and components. And its objective is, on one side, to make the greatest companies or governments that are responsible for this accountable, and on the other hand, try to avoid this creation of greenhouse gases, and also to pay for the damages and the losses that come from climate change, especially in those places and production areas that, as I mentioned, contribute less to this problem. Now, having this context, what we are going to do in this panel is analyze how climate justice is in our country from different sectors and the expertise of our speakers. And for that, I would like to give the floor to Renata, who first of all is going to introduce a case on how a specific center, which is fishing, they are living these differentiated effects of climate change so that we can continue with our ideas with Celeste and Froilan on how we should move forward or improve access to justice in order to reach climate justice. Thank you very much, and the floor is yours, Renata. Thank you, Anaí, and thank you for the invitation to Mexico Evalúa. I am going to present. This is a very specific case. Sometimes we think in climate justice and we think of courts, and we need to see what is behind, who is telling this story and what it means. The climate crisis has very specific effects in the ocean. It destroys complete habitats. It ends with the life of marine animals. And there's something that we need to remember is that there are human beings that are in the first line of the effects of this climate crisis. I would like to talk about people who dedicate to fishing. We have been working in different campaigns, and we are trying to tackle what we can control in an almost immediate way, such as pollution, fishing, the destruction of habitats in a very specific way. But there is also the white elephant on the room every time we're having these discussions, which is the changes in temperature and the acidification of oceans that has an effect as well. And in the end of the day, all of these have a common component. It is human beings who are in the center of this discussion. We are the ones who have generated this, who can transform it, but we are also living the effects in a very specific way. We are all suffering from this climate crisis, but we are not suffering it in the same way. And it's very important to understand that when we think about justice and environment, these are hand to hand. The effects are not the same for everyone, and therefore responses should not be the same. In the specific case of fisheries, in this case in Mexico, we have the largest component that, as you can see, is the maximum sustainable yield. This means that we are getting what is just enough for the people of that, for the population of that species to be maintained. But this does not consider climate crisis or changes of temperature, currents, or anything else. The light blue part, we have damage, and 7% with other status, which we don't know what it is. When we add up this 63 and 17%, we have 80% of our fisheries in damage or about to be damaged, because the climate crisis, what it's going to do, it's going to modify the situation in which we have done the calculations for these fisheries. So we have this really large percentage that is not affecting in the same way, not even to the people that dedicate to fishing. In Oceana, we developed a social map of fishing that shows how many human beings are behind each of these fisheries, and how to think that maybe one of these fisheries that are being damaged have different effects. We may see some of the fish here, or shrimp, which is one of the largest populations of fish that are being used and that have a greatest impact in the lives of fishers. This is another way of seeing the same data, in which we can see the percentage of people that dedicate to it, but also the situation in which they are, the situation in which they are in this deterioration of the fisheries. And all of this shows us a very specific impact in some fishers above others. This map, what it means is that where we have more fishers and where the poorest fishers are, there's where we see this immediate effect in the fisheries. And those who are just months away or a few years away from losing their livelihood for their families. This is just an example. Sometimes we believe in fishers and we think about the climate and oceans and its importance, and then we think about fishers as the enemies of oceans. And there are different nuances for all this story. This is the specific case of Edgar, a fisher in Mazatlan. What you can see in that photograph is what he could fish in one day. This is a very specific fishing that he could do, and that's what he needs to sell to live throughout the day. That's what he's facing with climate change or with storms. When this happens, he needs to stop fishing and he doesn't have this income for himself and for his family. So these people with this fishery, which is very selective and has very few effect in habitats and in the ocean, we are putting them in the same basket of this industry fishing that may have more damaging effects for the ocean. However, they are going to receive the greatest impacts of the climate crisis and everything that is happening in the ocean. If you want to know more, there's this event tomorrow at 11 a.m. It's going to be a relationship between the climate crisis and fishing in order to understand how we are not considering this climate crisis and its effects in fisheries. Now, just quickly, how would climate justice would look like in oceans? We do not need to wait for there to be damaging acts for the ocean in order to enable public policies and the justice systems. There are a lot of steps that we can do before that. What leads many fishers to overfish is not the need to destroy the ocean, but it's a need of social and living situations that are not optimal for them. We need to consider them to be subject of rights. We need to address that in a wider way, and not only from fishing. They need to have access to education, social security, health, etc. And we need to understand that there is not a problem on climate crisis with this punitive side. There are a lot of things that we need to do before the disaster happens. And the second thing is that we need to consider the information of this climate crisis within our own responses as a state. When we find topics such as what is happening in the ocean, who are the communities that are in the coasts, the fisher communities who are going to be the most affected. And we should not forget that the climate crisis is in the core of the people, and some people are above others. We're not all in the same boat. Unfortunately, the effects of the climate crisis are different, and also the actions of the states are unequal to face this climate crisis. The invitation is to act according to who is receiving the greatest impacts. And as Anai mentioned, these are usually the people that are contributing the least to this climate crisis. Thank you very much. I will stop sharing my screen. Thank you, Renata. Without a question, this was a very practical presentation on how today these effects can be seen in a specific context in our country, considering the cost that we have and the great amount that we see in this and that live from this activity. And you also mentioned some elements that, from your perspective, what should be considered in this climate justice from judicial elements, talking about sanctions and impunity, as well as accountability, but also important elements in the economy and in society that should be considered in the construction of this justice element. And to go a little bit deeper into what justice means and what are the challenges, and also how it can be addressed by putting it into this climate justice topic, Dr. Celeste is going to share her presentation and her remarks. And I would like to remind everyone that in the end, we have a Q&A session so that you may think of your questions and you write them down. And with no further comments, Dr. Celeste, the floor is yours. Thank you, Anaid. I don't know if you are going to do the presentation or I can share my screen. We have it. Do you have it there? I think you can see it now, right? Yes, we can see it now. Well, thank you very much for this presentation. I'm very glad to be here with you. For us, it's very important to share a little bit these reflections on a topic that is more and more important, which is environmental justice. We are living in a new geological age, according to new studies that were recently published. Many of them tell us that we are reaching the Anthropocene, which is a new geological age, and this presents important challenges for all of us. And I think that the case that Renata is mentioning shows us the implications of environmental justice in a case study, which is related to fishing. And this is a topic that we need to see in detail because this concept of environmental justice is subject to definition issues. And we can understand environmental justice as a distribution of loads or benefits and responsibilities that are related to the access to resources or natural goods and specific laws to regulate the use and access, as well as to repair the damages that the social and economical activities cause to the environment. And this is just a general way to understand environmental justice. However, this same concept is going to have 4 perspectives. Each of them is very complex and very discussed. So what would we understand by justice and how does it combine with the environmental problems? From a legal standpoint, we need to be very clear that the person that breaks the law is committing a crime against justice. But how can this be related to the environment? It seems that these are 2 completely different things that cannot be related. In the second place, how do we interpret this relationship from the public policies that we can design, precisely to be able to maintain this balance between people and nature? The third perspective that we can identify here is that the definitions and the limits that are established usually by environmental law and the historical and political context, it has a series of demands that are difficult to complement. And what I mentioned, the disruption of the Anthropocene, this new geological age that demands that we take into account these examples that Renata was mentioning, this way of visualizing and seeing people that depend on a resource and how to achieve more sustainable perspectives. We can identify some types of environmental justice. The first one, I would relate it to environmental law. We can talk about access to environmental justice, and this is related to the use of laws or regulations to prioritize the regulation of the use and access to natural resources. This is the type of justice that we can identify, and that is related to the application, to the enforcement of law, and also to apply a series of sanctions for those who do not comply with these laws. The second type of justice is a little bit wider. We are talking about a social and environmental justice, which is related to acknowledging that people have a right to the use of natural resources beyond what is established in the law. And this is an approach that has had more importance in the last few years. From the 70s till today, it has been acknowledged that there are collective actions and that there are people that are using these resources and not necessarily the laws are being complied with. And we need to consider that this represents a more substantive approach, and we may understand as social and environmental crimes those that are not classified or recognized by this. And a third type of justice, maybe it's more related with the climate emergency that we are living. And from there, we may identify other types of justice that are related to climate litigation, climate justice, and retributive climate justice, which is also related to the fact that the countries should contribute to this climate change issue. And also, I would like to say that the approach of environmental law requires the constant update of the legislations and the criminal codes, but also there are a lot of damages and risks that are related to nature, and many of these damages are not repairable. And environmental justice has a lot of community and social applications related to nature, but it requires for it to be translated in legal mechanisms in order to diminish or decrease the environmental effects. And also climate justice depends on the ways these are implemented in the national legislations. This would be my contribution right now. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much, Celeste. You have given us very important ideas on how we should consider this concept of justice from different areas. And one of them is more related to climate justice, which is related to equity and the distribution of these loads, besides the access to natural resources. And maybe to finish this first round with Froilán, having heard the case study that Renata mentioned, and also with the theoretical part and the challenges of how to comply with justice, maybe Froilán can create a reflection of what would be the mechanisms so that communities that depend on natural resources may have access to this environmental justice, and in a very specific way to climate justice. So what would be these tools or the mechanisms that you think that should exist, or if they already exist, what are the challenges for them to be effective so that they can have access to this justice? I mean, the most vulnerable populations can have access to it.
Thank
you very much, Anaid. The main mechanism that we have seen in recent years and that is promoted in the most recent COP meeting is for them to be included in the decision-making processes. It may seem logic, but we're full of clear examples that this is not being done. One of them was a case in Houston in 1979, where it is said that the concept of environmental justice was born. And lawyer Robert Bullard I'm sorry, could you hear me? Yes, the last 20 seconds you just muted. Okay, this lawyer was acknowledged as the father of environmental justice. He led a series of trials against the city of Houston because they were going to put a new landfill. And what they saw is that in that city, more than 82% of the landfills that were built in the last 100 years had been focused on areas where there were mainly African-American population, and only 25% of the population was African-American. So it was a very important concentration. This was a very known case. And even though they lost that trial, and it was possible to see the relevance of the analysis, and most of the decision-making processes that were done here was because of governments that were mainly represented by white population in that moment in Houston. And in different interviews, Robert Bullard also explained that, in his opinion, that was the main objective. And the second example is also related to the organizations of environmental preservation. The Nature Conservancy is an organization that is that has been around for more than 65 years. We have promoted the creation of different national parks all over the world for many years. And well, the creation of these national parks did not involve works with the communities that could live there, and they had restrictions on the practices that they could have without asking for consent and restricting their ways of life, or they could also buy their lands. And many national parks did not have the proper management that was expected from them because the local communities were never involved in this. So we have promoted different changes. For instance, in Canada, the most recent national park was created last year. It's 6 million acres. And in this case, its creation was along with the local communities, and they are going to be co-managing this park. And something that is actually relevant is that acknowledges the connection that these communities have with nature, and that they are communities that appreciate what nature gives them. And usually these are the greatest protectors of the resources that they have. So that would be the main mechanism that I would promote. And the second type of mechanism that I consider to be important is that the assessments done by the different governments on the works that may have an impact on the communities are assessed in a comprehensive way on the regions where they live. And there is also a recent example from 2019 that got to the Supreme Court in Chile from the Valparaiso area, where it was an area that in the last 20 years, they had a lot of growth. There were a lot of licenses authorized for the different types of industries, and all those industries were complying with the regulations. They were not breaking any environmental laws. When they went to the environmental authorities, they complied with everything. However, the level of growth was such that in 2018, the cases of asthma in the city started to grow significantly. There were also more than 300 people that were suffering from something in the city, and they did not know why. And one of the reflections that they did from these cases that they could not know who was responsible from authorizing all these works, and these were authorized in individual aspects. And one of the aspects that the Supreme Court promoted was to do a comprehensive assessment on how the different works that were impacting the communities were going to have a joint impact, and then start from that. Those would be the two mechanisms that I would propose. Thank you very much, Froilan. It was also very interesting because you are giving an element that goes beyond the law and that also calls for politics. And I mean, we are building and doing public policies so that these communities are considered from the construction of policies that many times from the implementation can violate the rights from the communities, starting by ignoring them as the people that are benefiting or being affected by this. And there are many cases that, for instance, the installation or the creation of wind parks or these renewable energy projects that are promoting the mitigation, they were being implemented without the consent of the indigenous communities. So while they are trying to solve a problem, which is the mitigation of greenhouse gases, they are creating social and environmental conflicts. And that's the point where this principle of social participation has been considered, not only as an initiative, but also in the construction of different policies. And also something very valuable that you mentioned is how these instruments of environmental policies right now in the protected areas and the assessments of environmental impact from its creation, but also for its application, can contribute to create justice or injustice, in this case related to climate. And as you mentioned, even with the strict compliance of law, many times you can create damages at a middle and long term. And there is also a very important principle that is very relevant in climate change, which is provisional remedies. And because we don't know what is going to happen, we need to have a moderate risk management, because there are a lot of effects that we cannot foresee. Thank you very much for this first round. And I would like to introduce the second round, having heard your previous interventions. And I think that we have some common elements.
We agree that we have here a social component, which is pivotal, and we cannot therefore ignore this social component, which generally is the societies or the most vulnerable communities, structurally speaking. And these are the ones that will have the greatest impacts because of the climate changes. Therefore, we need to pay attention to a justice concept that goes beyond lawfulness. And we will have to think about the construction of policies, not just of laws, but policies including these communities. And we must take effects into consideration in the short and long terms. For an intergenerational principle, which is how we were given this planet and how we're going to be giving it in return. I will ask now for this next intervention, how could we measure environmental justice and climate justice, and who has therefore the authorized voice to say what's just and what is not? Is it a law, a judge, the affected community, the state? Is the state that has to rule the creation of human rights and control them? So based on your expertise and on what you have just shared with us, I would like you to answer this question. How could we say that we are advancing in terms of environmental justice? What are the elements would be, and who is going to define what justice is? Who is the authorized voice, or is it many voices actually? So you have 5 minutes to answer to this question. Would you like to start as we did the first round, or would you want me to choose? Okay, go ahead, Celeste. Can you hear me? Yes, we can. I can tell you a little bit about what we're doing from the Las Americas University Puebla, which is a proposal for the measurement of environmental justice. I would like to have my presentation shared on the screen, please. There we go. Thank you. This is an index we just presented in April 2020, and it aims at measuring environmental impunity. This stems from a very broad exercise that started in 2014 at the university. And just a couple of years ago, we started to build it for the environmental field. We are a group of professors and university researchers, together with talented students because of their interest in research. We presented this index, and I think that this is going to take several of the elements that about which Renata and Freilan just told us. And in here, we have to consider the social aspect in the measurement of environmental justice. We understand environmental impunity, the impossibility to prosecute, sanction, and repair crimes and damages against the environment. This is the type of justice about which I was speaking at the beginning of my presentation, the absence of application or enforcement of environmental public policies, and then analyzing the state's powers to achieve and materialize those climate and environment goals. And the respect of a healthy, of the right to a healthy environment. That's the way that in which the United Nations has defined it. And the inexistence of public policies in the long term. This concern that is being taken from different sectors and the need for these to be long-term planned. We have to have intergenerational actions that redistribute to the next generations, so we can give them a better environment. This is the more general concept of the index. We measured several capacities, the institutional capacity at the state level, at the federal state level, because we analyzed each of the Mexican states, the environmental aspect concerning murders of activists, and everything related to this dimension, the environmental degradation, deforestation, and in here we are considering other indices as well of natural capital, and their intergenerational strategy that concerns or revolves around the existence of legislation considering future generations, climate change, and biodiversity loss. We analyzed all of this with 42 indicators. This was complex, you can tell, and we needed uniform information for all of these dimensions of all of the Mexican states. Mexico has made good progress to measure somehow the environment aspect at a domestic level, but it is still missing capacities to measure this at the state, at the country level. We use the green criminology aspect, perspective, the approaches we were just mentioning, and this concerns the social and environmental justice. And we found this map of environmental impunity in each of the Mexican states. And unfortunately, we have an average of 1.93, which is the domestic average, and very few states, around 9 states, are above the 2-point rates. Each one of these 4 dimensions is worth 1 point. So very few states, only 10, are above the 2-point rates, and 1.93 is the domestic average. So in these 4 dimensions we're analyzing, we have a very poor rates at the Mexican level, at the Mexican states level, and we should be able to discuss this at the same level. Next one, please. I'm sure that I have used most of my time. So we have there the results per Mexican state. Durango, Morelos, Baja California, Querétaro have the best results, and the words Colima, Sinaloa, Tlaxcala, Zacatecas, the states which have a way lower level. Results per dimension. The next one. The next one. The next one again. So I don't use more time. Next one, please. In here, I would like to tell that we need better capacities for all the Mexican states, budgets, resources, to have a better measurement for this index. We have statistical information for the environment which is unequal throughout the country. We need an indicator that measures domestically justice, environmental justice, rights. It's important to develop these capacities at the government. This statistical information must allow to measure conflict and environmental victims. It's important to develop a state assessment system. It's not enough knowing that there are laws against climate change and for the protection of biodiversity. There must be effectiveness in the application of these programs in the state. Of course, we need, because of this global environmental crisis discussed at different international fora, and that has kept us for almost 2 years now locked down at home. We have to consider the human rights at the environmental level, and we have to acknowledge the most vulnerable populations faced to the climate change problem. Thank you very much. That would be what we're doing, and I think this can contribute to the analysis or the measurement of environmental justice. This is a thorough methodology to measure somewhat abstract concept and materialize it with these 4 variables. A very good contribution indeed. Renata, the floor is yours. Thank you, Anaid. When one thinks about justice, there are always several components. One possibility here is punishment, who pollute, who is damaging everything. And on the other hand, we have to think who are being affected the most and at which extent. For the part of who polluted, it's rather punitive in Mexico than justice in Asia. The justice system goes for what's easier to process, to stop. I will never forget when I read a story of a person who had been 8 years in the prison because he had killed 2 rabbits in a national protected area, and then a company that paid a tiny part of its income after having polluted water bodies. So we have a distinction here. Before we go into the topic, we're going to have a distinction. And we have a trend to punish more fully the actions that are having a dominant impact on the environment. When we speak about environment justice, I think about, I rather think about the people who are more affected, and we have justice in this at the COP26. We haven't been able to to control emissions. It's a topic that it's there as if it did not exist, and we have several challenges here. For this part, those who are affected the most, I think that we have a specific concern. It's the creation of public policies. I am a politologist, and I think we need a proposal for this before we even try to bring people to justice, given the problems we have in Mexico in terms of access to justice. However, there is a challenge here, and even if when I have just said this, there is a challenge for the justice system in terms of climate crisis. It's almost impossible unless we have a direct relationship, unless we can prove how we have a direct impact on people's health. Otherwise, it's very difficult to have this, to establish this cause that has to be very evident for everyone to see how an action determines an environmental consequence, which is the line of thought of judges. And Mexico and the world must adapt to this way to understand causality in a more comprehensive way. For example, we're speaking about this in the case of Chile. We did not know what the company was responsible for this impact, and this happens a lot in terms of access to justice. The response by the state sometimes is going to create these inequalities itself. You mentioned it, Anna, is with the air turbines. So it's a matter of full communities of people, of indigenous peoples, but there are other approaches by the state in which we do have some impact that could reverse the negative effects on the most vulnerable populations. A specific example would be renewable energies, which do empower, that make power electricity more expensive. But those who have a better understanding will have subsidized populations at a greater level of vulnerability. For the transition of to these energies do not absorb this change. So it's true that sometimes we have to move towards polluting less, which is going to have immediate effects in the people's economies. But that's why the studies are there, for them to have this greater impact. And there was a specific question, we have to make these decisions. I think we have all to be at the table of discussions. We will be making a mistake whether we consider environmental or climate justice depends on experts, on judges, and only on the governments and the organizations. We need to have broader conversations between different people. And I think that the principle that on which we should agree very soon is that the affected people have to be at the center of discussions. We're going to take an action to solve a problem. People who are going to be directly affected by that have to be at the center, wherever and about whatever. So we have to start doing this genuinely, so we can get to more virtuous actions in terms of climate and social and environmental justice. Thank you very much, Renata. Without a doubt, we have to place the most affected ones at the center, so we can say what's fair and what is not fair. That would be the best. In the case of a country, at the Congress, sometimes we have abstract laws that do not have the social foundation, or they lack knowledge of the reality. Thank you very much. And to close this block and then to move to the other questions we have from the public, I would like to listen to Froilan and his reflection. Thank you very much, Anaim. We have to think about measurements and where the voices of these measurements should be. Celeste made already an identification of the main ones. One that I would like to highlight is that planning models have to include these variables. For instance, 7 years ago, CBE in Coatzacoalcos River, which is a dam-free river, which is one of the longest rivers that still flows freely. There were plans to create new dams for the next 40 years, 14 dams that were going to generate over 80% of power and electricity generation. For these initial models, when we started to consider what they started to consider where their dams would be, we were not considering deeply the environmental impacts, nor which communities would be affected. What happened? There was a collaboration with the Inter-American Bank of Development, with organizations, with with the Nature Conservancy to conduct models of how we could have a better planning for the river that respect the needs and meet the needs of power. But at the first time, and at the first stage, we'll consider the environmental impacts. And here we had these models and how we could minimize at 90% of the natural impacts and only with 5 dams. And how can we, why not include more variables? That's what we said. So we need further studies, but from the beginning, this allows to see how we can achieve these. And finally, the last model that was pre-approved, because these are very long-term plannings. We only had 4 dams, but they were not going to include community mobilization. At the beginning, we were to have 5, and this is going to reduce a lot the environmental impact. I think that an important measurement and an indicator, and we need indicators that let us know that we are living this. With regards to the voices that should measure it, I think it should be everyone. And this is something that we should have, and we should do it. Almost nobody is doing this. And in general, with climate change, we have a lot of surveys, at least here in the United States. Only 50% of people think that some impacts will have some impact in their lives, when actually maybe they're even suffering this. But out of that 50%, around 20%, well, we're having only 30% are having discussions around this of impacts, and in terms of what we could do. If we do not speak about these topics, how are we going to take actions for the type of measurements that we need to correct them? And well, that's why I would like to thank Mexico Evalúa for organizing this room that allows to have this type of conversations, so we can speak more about these topics. And these are topics that sometimes, with the examples we're given, we could think, okay, the Coatzacoalcos River is very far away, and the high latitudes of another area are so far away. But this is also getting to urban areas, and we can think about where we can reach the main environmental benefits. For instance, in a city where we have the best sport and green areas, if you want to make exercise and be healthy. We saw the relevance of this with this year and a half of a pandemic, to have a good condition and get physical condition, also where we have the impacts, where we have the landfills of your city, and several indicators that can take you to say, okay, how is the city in which we live, and how can we assess whether this is a fair in environmental terms. Thank you very much, Florian, for your example of this centrals. When we try to solve a problem, and also when the ecosystem where we'll have this climate solutions, we're going to generate a greater problem, the one that we're trying to solve, and several parallel problems that we have to be dealing with. And from the conception of these public policies, in these projects, we need to take them into account. This is going to help, and of course, the system of punishment and accountability is very important, and the role of the judges as well. A lot has been said by the judiciaries of through the courts of all countries, for instance, hydrological justice with regards to climate justice. But if we all have something to say about it, I think that we all build this climate justice. And having said this, just a couple of questions. I hope we can answer them, one of which is, what's the role and the responsibility for companies We speak about corporate accountability, but we have no transparency for business operators. We're going to give 1 minute to answer this because we are running out of time. And the second question would be whether you identify any type of community effort from the populations living from natural resources to achieve access to justice and to balance the role and responsibility for businesses. That's the first question. I would like to listen each one of you for a minute, and then we will go to the second question. Or if you prefer, one can answer this question, or the three can answer this question as you prefer. Okay, I can answer. I'm going to share my point of view with you. With regards to the role of the businesses in this problem of justice, I think it's pivotal. For instance, in the case of Puebla, a very polluted river that you may know, the Atoyac River, which is the second most polluted river of the country. And in spite of the endeavors and the work of NGOs, so we can rescue this river, there is coordination is still missing between the Mexican states, and one of the problems that we have and that we haven't been able to solve in spite of so many years of attempts. The legislation for businesses and for power plants and for them to perform efficiently, for me, it's like the closest example I have to the place where I live and where, unfortunately, we haven't been able. I mean, the company's role is important because we have several textile industries that pollute the river because of the chemicals they use, and we need a deep regulation here, but not just companies. We also have residential buildings whose wastewater goes directly to the Atoyac River, and these condos have sprawled. And with the different municipality and state levels, we have to work with them as to prevent this problem we have had for several years, and this has not been something successful, unfortunately. Thank you very much, and I think this is very important. I would like to, the role of businesses is very important, but we have to have something clear. They're not going to self-regulate. They will never go against their own economic interests to protect anything. This won't happen. They have to be regulated. We need to work with the business people, and we need to build agreements. Yes, but we have to regulate, and the power that consumers have got is huge. We have been able to transform many things, and they're not going to do this bona fide. They need this boost and to have people pulling in the same direction, and together we have to be vigilant all the time. It's very easy sometimes we see this, these big businesses that increased their huge, they increased their gains, and then they're giving they earned millions, billions, and now they're just giving millions to solve any environmental problems. And there are cases in which communities are organizing. This is different, and here we see that we have an immediate affectation, and if they don't do anything, and if they wait for states to act, in the case of fishing, there are communities that they have seen that the resource deteriorates, and they organize so they can restore, repopulate, and have a self-imposed non-hunting or fishing periods, even when they do not have the mechanisms of support. I am a fan of Ostrom. There are big examples for which people themselves are organizing, and in a community way they are managing resources in a 1,000 ways better than others. So we have this happening in small points, and we have to scale this up and bring it to a level in which people are at the center, make decisions, and for which there is a principle to preserve their natural resource of which they are taking their livelihood. Thank you very much, Renata Freeline. You've got 1 minute. Thank you. I think about the second question. I would like to recommend, in case you want to know more about community-led projects in Mexico. We've got several examples, but I would like to highlight the Territory Integration Center, CITES, Spanish acronym, and these are unions of different community land owners focused on how they can better manage the natural resources and how they can have a greater capacity to face the climate change consequences. Actually, we've had 4 successful success cases that were presented in our COP, and through the development management, Chairperson of Edgar receiving this support from the United States for this type of projects, and this is going to be channeling through the Nature Conservancy to support community initiatives in these states. Thank you very much, Froilan. Well, thank you to our panelists. We have more questions that we will be sending you through the chat. And also, you can send your answers to the organizers so they can send them in turn to the public. Thank you for this short but very rich exchange of ideas, experiences, and reflections. And I will invite the public to continue with us for the next panels after the Justice Innovation Forum. And I will remind you that tomorrow we will we'll be here again. Thank you very much, and greetings, and have a great afternoon. Thank you.
Muchas gracias a nuestros panelistas y a nuestra moderadora Ana Velasco por este panel sobre justicia climática. Nos compartieron perspectivas, experiencias, herramientas sobre la justicia ambiental y la justicia climática, así como casos de referencia y alternativas para hacerla efectiva. Continuamos con el programa de este segundo foro internacional, la innovación en la justicia. Tendremos ahora el panel Redes sociales e impartición de justicia, aplicación de la ley según la investigación social.
The administration
Este panel
of justice,
estará moderado por
the law
Patricia
enforcement
Dobeso,
according to
investigadora de
social
Creatur.
outrage. This is going to
Además,
be facilitated by Patricia
Negrete,
Dobeso. We
investigadora y
will
productora
have
del documental
Laida
Presunto
Negrete,
Culpable
researcher
y de
and
la serie
producer
Duda
of the
Razonable.
documentary
Anel Pineda Marín,
Presunto
abogada y
Culpable,
representante del caso
Anel
de
Pineda
justicia
Marín,
por
a lawyer and
Inés.
representative in the case
Arturo
of
Ángel, periodista de
justice
Animal Político.
for Inés, Arturo
Y
Ángel,
Alfredo Lecona,
journalist from
activista,
Animal
actor y
Político, and
columnista
Alfredo Lecona,
en Reforma, Foro TV y
activist,
el podcast El
actor,
Café de la
and
Mañana.
journalist for the
Se
column
abordarán
Café de la
los siguientes
Mañana.
temas. El uso de las redes sociales en la
They will
administración
talk
de
about the
justicia,
topic on justice,
las redes sociales como nuevo mecanismo de
social
búsqueda de
media, and
justicia
the application of
y la viralización de
law
información,
and
la
the
ciudadanía como
legalization of
juez. Le
information, the
damos la bienvenida
citizenship
a
as
Patricia Dobeso.
the judge. And we welcome all of you. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone that is seeing us today who were able to connect to this space. I am very lucky to facilitate this conversation with 4 people with different and complementary profiles for this topic, talking about something very relevant that is happening right now while we talk, which is irrelevant for justice or injustice for today, which is social media. In 1 hour, we will try to explore the role that social media have today in the perception of the administration of justice or in the true administration of it, how to manage this tension if the rights are being violated, if justice becomes more expedited because of social media with the social outrage that we see. And the methodology is very simple. We have a bit less than an hour so that we can have these dialogues with our speakers who were already introduced, and I would like to give them the floor already. So I'm going to ask the first question, the first trigger question. Each of you will have 5 minutes, and then we will do a second round with a second question to respond to the presentations of our colleagues. The first question that I would like to start with Laida, then Arturo and Nelly, and then Alfredo. The first question is, our justice structure is moving from the public perception of the viralization of cases, yes or not? And if this violates rights such as privacy and the status of innocence and other approaches to other things in Mexico. We start with you, Laida. Your microphone is on mute. Thank you. I'm Laida Negrete. I'm one of the producers of Presunto Culpable, also one of the producers of Duda Razonable, and it's an honor for me to be here in this panel with people that I admire so much and to talk about these justice procedures in Mexico. I think that this panel is a good opportunity to talk about how citizens can gather tools that are not the institutional tools or the tools that the governments provide in order to try and have justice and compensate the inequality or the lack of access to justice. So in my personal experience with this movie was to take a camera and picture a process that had not reached the media, that was not seen by the press. And it was a routine case. So through different stories, I wanted to make it relevant. And it's not only to discuss a specific case, but to see the deficiencies of a system. This was Presunto Culpable or Presumed Guilty, the movie. And we are about to launch a new series called Duda Razonable, a Reasonable Doubt, which is a mini-series that will be launched on November 26th in Netflix. And once again, it's about giving light to a case. In this case, it's a case in Macuspana, Tabasco. This was a follow-up that started by Roberto Hernandez, the director, since 2015. And it's a case that is actually alive. And I think that this helps us discuss these topics, because since this is a current case and we believe this is some injustice against 4 people with low income, for them to be heard, we did a mini-series of 4 episodes in a global platform in order to give light to this case and demand that there is a response by the justice system. And it started with just a small crash in a gas station in Ciudad Pemex in Macuspana, Tabasco, and then it goes through a suspicion of 2 kidnaps and many years in prison. And this is a situation that is very complicated, and it's possible to generate a documentary miniseries that traps us and that takes us through every episode to give light to it. So what are the questions that we established throughout this documentary? For instance, the alleged victims of these kidnaps, how are we treating them? We have the records, the videos of these trials, because we can record them now, and the audience will be able to see how they are, how this trial is being done in this process. And it's a follow-up of different years. And during this jury trial, the identity of the victims is being preserved. And the first question is, how are we going to do this? What is the treatment that we're going to do? Who is going to protect the victim? So I think that I would like to leave some questions that I can discuss later. In Presumed Guilty, the key witness of the case placed an action against us, saying that we were saying something, and we went to the Supreme Court to say if a witness has the right to this privacy. I think that today we know we need to ask who has the obligation to protect them, and how these external cases can show us the protection of personal information. And with this, I will conclude. Now, Arturo, I'm sorry, what was the question? Because I was really into Laida's answer that I got distracted. Yes, Laida started talking about the tools that are given by having a documentary and how to reach this inequality in justice. And the question, as we had it, is if our justice system is moving from the public perception, from this social outrage and from cases becoming viral. And if it does, if this is violating rights such as privacy and presumption of innocence, such as the case of Presumed Guilty. So this is what we would like to analyze. Well, first of all, I would say 2 things. The first one that maybe does not respond your specific question, but then I will go into that. But first of all, I would only say that one of the advantages that we have right now that didn't exist when Presumed Guilty was launched is that hearings are public. And I think it's one of the great pending items that we have in the media and in general society. I think that we have not taken advantage of the opportunity that we have of going to hearings to see how our justice system works, to see what judges say, to see how the district attorneys work. I don't know if someone has tried to go to a hearing to see how it is for a person who is accused of a robbery or of someone who is charged for murder. Those types of things, to see the nuances and the difference between someone who has a public attorney and someone else who has a private attorney. I think it would be an amazing exercise. And I think that journalists should be interested in that. But actually, it can be done by anyone. And in the previous criminal system, we didn't have that. So this is one of the things that I think with this revolution that we had with different factors, and one of the things that we could see in presumed guilty is that we're moving towards that. And however, I think this is an option that we have not used enough in society and in the media. And at the same time, since it's not being leveraged, it has created this behavior of our justice system of wanting to be closed again. So maybe this should not be so advertised, and they are trying to find ways to make it more difficult to have access to these areas that we had opened before. And also, I think we are moving towards a warranty criminal system where we talk about presumption of innocence, and before the lack of reliability that we had because of the investigations in Mexico, we didn't trust in the public prosecution, and we had to create a system in which part of this investigation is under the guardianship of a judge. And we also added prison, and that's what you were talking about at the beginning. I do think that the authorities, along with the media, many times, and maybe the media because we are ignorant or because we do not know about something, or maybe because we want to do it, we have contributed to selling this idea of justice and not a real justice. We have studied that recently. Well, we have investigated about it in Animal Político. I remember that 3 years ago, we published a report called Matar en Mexico. And I don't forget that this was about a judge that criticized how the investigations were really bad. He said, these are a disaster, this is embarrassing, and how you are doing it. But in the end, this judge sent people to jail, and he sent to jail the presumed guilty. And I asked him why. And he said, do you think I'm going to be the judge that left this alleged murder free? And this is just because this presumed guilty person had gone through a media prosecution where they were presented to the media like that, and the media were selling this idea without any type of self-criticism and violating the presumption of innocence. I thought that this was left behind and we were moving towards a new criminal system, but I'm finding the same thing. We may not sell the photograph, or we do not present the alleged guilty, and we sell this as a synonymous of justice. And we are selling this from the headquarters of the president, but we are also replicating that in the media. And people indeed believe that if you are not in jail, you are not paying for a crime you did. So I think that we are creating this image of justice as a punishment, and that's what this creates. That's what creates this type of situations. Thank you, Arturo Ángel. Hello, good afternoon. It is a pleasure for me to be here with you. Thank you very much for the invitation. First of all, I would like to talk about this presumption of innocence because it is a right indeed, but it also establishes rules of treatment. The court has studied about it and they have established it in different areas. Presumption of innocence establishes the rules on how the person needs to be treated. They need to be treated as the perpetrator of this crime. Maybe they should not be presented in front of the media. Their image should not be out there. The authorities should not present their information. They cannot be penalized before with different measures, and also establish different rules on how to determine what is the evidence that will determine this this ruling, and to see if these evidences are used to arrange the way this case is going to be analyzed from the judicial authorities, but also from the way in which they should work, in which they should investigate and present the evidences in the public prosecution agencies. So that's where the rules of presumption of innocence are. I like to talk about social media as a great stadium where we have a lot of people from different ages, criteria, and religions, but in a stadium where not everyone fits, because there are people who are left outside of that stadium, out of that social media. The last branch survey said, I think, that there are around 100 million profiles in social media active in Mexico right now. So let's assume that we have 100 million people, but we are not 100 million. We are 129 million people, I think, in this city. So there are people that are outside. And within the social media, there are people that have a better scope than others. And some people within this stadium can communicate something and can only tell it to the people next to them. And some people will be able to reach half of the stadium, and some people will be able to reach the screens that are projecting to the whole stadium. But that does not change the rules of the game that is being played down there. You may think about whatever sports match you want. In the field, the rules are the same, and they do not change, or they should not change, according to the noise that is around the match and how much people can communicate or not. The thing is that it is actually having an influence. Sometimes it is for good, and sometimes it is for wrong. As Angel was saying, it could be that a judicial authority rules this by violating the presumption of innocence, because here it's being violated if the judge or the person that is ruling is taking a resolution based on the evidence, not based on the presumption of innocence, but what they are perceiving in society. So who is violating this presumption of innocence are the people around it, who are not the people around it who are discussing this topic, but the judicial authority who is not applying the rules of the game. It's as if we thought that the referee in a soccer match is deciding according to the people yelling in the stadium in order to say if there was a fault during the match. So I think it is important to separate this topic of presumption of innocence and also the pinpointing that people can do through social media of one case or another case. If we focus this debate according to the games of the rule, the rules of the game, beyond the people, beyond the media, if the judges, in this case the referee, is acting according to the rules, then I think that we could have a more fruitful debate for everyone. But also, I think that it would allow us to say if the actions of these authorities are appropriate, and that can be shown to everyone. I think I can leave my comment here. Thank you, Anel. It's very interesting to see the different points of view in this first round. Thank you, Patty. First of all, I want to thank you for the opportunity to be here with people that I admire and care about a lot. I think that they are titans in what they do, and I am very happy to be able to share this here in such a way that this conversation sends me to the interest that I can have in justice, or how this presumed guilty movie, of course, changed my whole perception that I had on justice in our country. And the things that Laida mentioned with these institutional tools, the fact that we have this evolution from this type of application of the justice and to put it into public scrutiny. And I think that we are not free from those vices. And I totally agree with the analysis that Anel did of this great stadium. And to answer the question, I would say, I think in presumed guilty, and I think of the amount of evidence and things that we could see there of something that was not fair. And it was documented by a case of extraordinary people such as Laida, who did this documentary. And I think about what we saw a few weeks ago and the power that one photograph has of one alleged criminal, a white neck criminal, as some people would say. This was Emilio Lozoya. This was a picture taken by one journalist to show this icon of impunity that Emilio Lozoya became because of reasons that I may not address here, but that definitely represented something for Mexican society. This was something that Mexican society was angry about, and the capability that it has to activate different mechanisms of justice or to make changes in different things that we saw just because we saw that picture. So social media have closed the gap of what can be communicated in all senses and to outrage the Mexican society. And Mexico Evalúa has done a great job in the findings, saying that impunity is 95%, but I don't think it's necessary for most Mexicans to have the number, the figure, to know that justice in Mexico does not work, to know that in Mexico there are crimes, there are murders and all types of things because it is allowed and because people can do it. And I would like to connect this with the reflection that Arturo made by the end of his intervention, because yes, I do think that a justice that comes from the people is being built. I'm not trying to blame social media of everything that is happening. There has always been this pressure from the media. There have always been media that, for good or for bad, as Arturo said, are working jointly with the justice institutions to create this anger. And I think that the way this is moving forward with the presidential speech is being really, really large. And I am concerned about two things. The Pandora case that was opened with this modification to the 19 article that brings us to this really, really sad situation of preventive custody. And we are always hearing about that the poor go first. And I think that we have this construction of prison, of severe crimes, of putting every criminals in prison, and do not ask ourselves if there is something that is not correct when prisons are full and there's still impunity of 95%. So this is something that is happening in an environment such as social media are presenting, because this is the new stadium or the public forum. And just to finish off my first presentation, the phenomenon of the militarization. I think that both preventive custody and this militarization, I put in this revenge topic of punishment that goes beyond any rational or a serious analysis that we need to do for our justice system. I would leave that as my first reflection, and once again, thank you very much. Thank you, Alfredo. I think that there is clearly a consensus that social media are a tool and they are making things move. The problem is the nuances that there are, and that there is no consensus of who is receiving this pressure and how they receive, how the judges or the legislators are receiving this pressure and what they do about it. Regarding, for instance, preventive custody, or the idea that being in prison means justice. So the next question that I wanted to ask you, and it's kind of also open for you to react or complement your first intervention, is what is the role of the lawmakers, I mean, also judges and the public prosecutors before social media? I mean, turn them off and don't listen to them, or how to incorporate them into this idea? As you were saying, this is a new reality. Pressure, public pressure has always been there, but how to approach a new agreement in such a way that they are not damaging and that they are contributing with something. So what could be the role that the lawmakers and judges need to have before social media? Laida, please. This is a great question. What should judges and lawmakers do? I think that any space of debate has the potential of damaging and of helping. I believe more in a self-regulation, that we discuss the way we are doing it today, what are the problems and the boundaries, more than trying to establish general boundaries. I don't think this is something that can be regulated, because what's interesting of these cases is to see that from a specific context and case. So I want to go back to the case of Presumed Guilty, because many of us saw this movie and then we did not see the aftermath. There were two claims in important places. One was the witness, which was the key witness according to the case, or he thought that Toño Zúñiga had shot the victim. And we never asked that person their permission for him to be recorded. And we had the permission of the court and from the prison, but we never asked him. So he went to trial saying that he was not asked for permission and he had his right to privacy. And we said, yes, you have the right to privacy, but there is also this right to making things public. So what is more important? So both of them are basic rights. So we said, in this case, you have right to privacy, but we didn't film you in your house, in your bathroom, or in your bedroom. We filmed you in a criminal trial, in a criminal procedure that the Constitution says must be public. And you are not a person in that moment. You are an evidence, so to speak. You are like an evidence that is being brought to the case. So this trial could not be public if we start removing this evidence, and there are so many witnesses and so many experts that we cannot take them out from that place where they are establishing something as evidence. That's the argument, but the argumentation, and both of them are good, and it's not clear what is going to happen until it reached the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court established the criteria that this is a case where the public part of this should prevail. But this was a divided decision. Not even in the Supreme Court, they said, yes, it's very clear and the people from the movie are right, or it was not, as the witness is right. There was also another case the family of the victim, in a certain moment, for a few seconds, there is an image of the body. And the family said, you have no right to present the victim in your images. And I think that this is a very good question as well. It's true, there is something very delicate. And when we checked the criteria that the journalists use on showing dead bodies, for instance, they talk about this self-regulation, this self-censorship. And there is also one case that I really liked, and they said for the dead body, try not to do it. Try not to show a human body, but sometimes it's necessary. And I think about this image that was important for all of us of the body of a dead child, a child from Syria who was dead on the beach. It was his body lying on the beach, and that puts everyone in this sense of emergency. It started moving people. So it depends on the place and the situation. And with the last minute that I have left, the series Duda Razonable is launched on November 23rd on Netflix, and there are going to be new questions. Is these recordings that we have from the public hearings and jury trials, which is just very few for the lack of investigation, the lack of quality of the judges in terms of seeing the deficiencies of the public prosecutors, as you mentioned, but who has the right to show those recordings and how? And we are using them, and we edit them, and we did everything. And another thing that I also mentioned is what was the treatment that we gave to the victims, that by law they had this privacy. And I invite you to see it, to discuss it, and to question it as well in social media so that we can continue with this conversation that I think is very important.
Thank you very much, Navidad. Arturo. There are several things here. First of all, what my colleagues have said is very interesting. Publicity in hearings. I think that's one of the big outstanding issues we have. I'm interested in what Leila said, because I would like to know how the recordings of those hearings are used, because we have this formula in our criminal system, which is logical. If you go, you can see the public hearing, but reproduction is forbidden unless you're part thereof. Even for transparency purposes, you can say, okay, I want to show a picture of the parties of the hearing because I'm writing this chronicle. No, you can't, because the National Code of Criminal Procedures that only parties have a right to the audio and video. That's the reason why when you go as public media, we go as a public to the hearings, you cannot go there with anything, sometimes not even with your pen, because they are terrified that they're going to record something and reproduce it later on. I think that sometimes the federal judiciary gave me the copy of an audio and video of Javier Duarte, but because the case was completely state, but the images were blurred, and it was only audio. Sometimes the videos, of course, we obtain videos of hearings because, the attorneys, because the authorities can filter them, but you can't reproduce them or in a specific medium, or it would depend on the circumstances, and it should not be the case. That's one big topic that is not going to be solved today, but it's one of the main outstanding issues. And now the topic of media, Alfredo said something that really caught my attention, and is that when we speak the way in which authorities have to behave before media, it's actually before people, because it's not that Twitter decides to tweet anything, it's people. I know we've got bots and all that, but these are people. And what happens now is that we have a larger resonance box on what, the time it would take you, to be concerned about something when you were waiting for the next day's newspaper. It's not the same with social media now. We have a more powerful tool right now. And thanks to social media, it's actually before people that has now a very powerful tool, but it's still before people. And I think the challenge is there. And that's what I wanted to say for the first part of my intervention. And I go back to this case, which is very popular and a very fresh one. Lucia did not do anything illegal for going to the restaurant and eating something there that was completely valid, and he was able to do that because he was not breaching the measures that he was imposed when he decided not to. Maybe decided not to detain them, but it was illogical because I was in the hearing, and I can tell you, this hearing that was the intermediate hearing. Well, this was a hearing just to request for further time for the case. The hearing became a trial, quotation marks, because of why Lisa went to have a supper at the restaurant. That's what it was. And for the prosecution, they wanted to say that Lisa had allowed himself to be pictured. Maybe I think that was a problem because he was caught, but it was his right. So the judge did well when he decided to have pretrial detention. He said, I'm not going to leave him in prison because you went there. I'm going to leave him in prison because from last year, I think that you had to be in the prison, but the prosecutors did not ask for it. But see how the matter of social pressure was concerned, because it's the prosecution that changed its attitude, because should that eviction not become public, we would not have this hostile attitude towards Emilio Lozoya. So this became a scandal. And why? Because people saw his picture. But actually, we were tired of journalists who were covering this. We were tired of saying that he had no domicile prison. We have published that he was not even going to sign, but we did not have the impact of that same picture. So that's an example of how a picture can create a social impact that not even media can create. This is going to make scandal that is going to move an authority to behave differently in a judicial trial. And I think this is very concerning. From the very first day we were saying the power of an image. But I'm very concerned that actually it's because of this type of appearances and impacts, how social indignation has this, and then the Mexican state machine is moved. Thank you, Arturo. Annette. And that's the fear I wanted to speak about, because they said can do a lot, but that's not going to change the national code of criminal procedures, nor international or domestic standards of due process. The rules did not change, as Arturo was saying. What changed is the equation, the authority, people of the public prosecutor's office, agents of the state changed the way in which they behave from what they see in social media, on social media, or the social perception that we can have through social media. And it's here where the problem lies, I think, because the problem is not that people discuss and are subject to public scrutiny for one case or another, but the problem is that rules will not be applied any longer, or that they are modified or to be stiffened or to be softened according to what each state agent, public prosecutor, the police, each one is going to move or change rules as they see their fit according to their reaction on social media. That's the problem, that we aren't considering the authority with this easiness. People do not understand that authorities are changing so easily, and this should be justified. And the judicial authority did not come out either to explain the reason for their decision of this pretrial detention. And then we have another topic, which is that of the agent making stipulations, because the lack of information is being filtered through speculations, like, how a picture can take you, or the fact that you are having a supper at an expensive restaurant can take you to be on a pre-trial detention. But this lack of information is not filtered in by the authority. The authority is not used to come out and explain its acting. It's not used to be transparent in its acting. Why? Because evidently being transparent, being accountable, explaining resolutions and explaining them in a way that can be understood by everyone with all of the technicism that sometimes do not allow you to say anything. But actually this can really explain the reasonings and the arguments by which one decision is made or not, and the authority does not want to do this. What happens with what society, well, they maintain these speculations, and we have misunderstandings that aren't addressed by the authorities, and we have a myriad of problems, because this is going to take us to media trials and people trials, and which are based on people and not on rules and the way in which the authorities are applying them. In the case of Liliana and Inés, I think that the organizations which were there for this case, we were interested at all times in making sure that the rules that were not being complied with were visible in that investigation, which the failures of the public prosecutor's office were, which were visible at the time in which this was being presented during the hearing. So we have to focus, and we have to be very precise on the fact that what we've got to discuss about is how the authority is applying a rule, in which cases it is applying it in a substantive way, because this is a person with a great social impact, a famous person or whatever, or when it is being applied in a different way to punish the fame of that same fame of that person. So in here, the matter is to question the authorities and their acting, because the rules are there. And from my point of view, the legislator and legislatures actually have no acting benchmark, because the rules are there. We have state agents who are applying, executing them according to the public perception. Thank you very much, Anel. Alfredo. You're muted, Alfredo, I'm afraid. Oh, a classic, right? If this does not happen in a forum, there is no forum at all. Well, what do legislators have to do? Well, let me tell you what they don't have to do. They have to stop proposing stupidities. And I'm saying this in this way because I have lost the notion of how many anti-meme cybersecurity initiatives they have tried to advance at the Congress with the pretext of social media. And I go back to what I was saying during my first intervention. It's very easy to find a villain and to make them accountable. As we were saying here, they are just the reflection of our society. I think that society has to move and has to change because of social media, because of immediacy, because of the immediacy of information, because of what a picture can cause, versus the work for a documentary. But that's the reflection of the society, and legislators should not be there trying to sell this to us. And I remember how when these initiatives started to arise, and what justice administrators and actors have to do, well, they have to be clear. They've got to speak Spanish, because legal Spanish, well, it has got also permitted onto social media. It's been centuries of justice and writing of these ink labyrinths of writing machines and physical files. And if we see this as I don't know if you have seen the Supreme Court of Justice mural, which is very iconic by Rafael Cavuro. You have the justice literally defeated, violated, subject to files, and social media are completely the opposite. They represent dynamics, something as simple as to file a suit, a complaint. Sometimes it can even be a snowball of things. Then that perception of justice, of even social and moral punishment, the president says it's way more, and we've got a president saying that beyond the sentence for the Brecht, when he's more concerned about things being known. That's what I was saying. What the people say, what the people's passion to speak for 1 or 2 days about a topic. For many, this is the perception that justice was made or not. And in here we have very deep topics like those of pre-trial detention, like in the case of Lozoya, but a case which was born on social media and that has implications that I would have loved to discuss further, like Yosto, like the case of Yosto YouTuber, because she was a case for publishing images and beyond the non-respect of privacy, but of course privacy of social media. We're going to see this when the world in writing of justice that is struggling to adapt to the new times and the new times and what they are setting for this, especially for these ways of these new and more dynamic ways of communication, as to create or social media should be that vehicle as to have access to the appropriate and manipulated information. Unfortunately, this vendetta thirst, that hard hand speech is jeopardizing the existence of a dialogue that will take us to have all of these investigations and to focus on what really matters. I know that social media themselves and providers have an accountability here, and we've got to speak about it. We've got to speak about how this has been allowed in other countries and in very specific social media, the manipulation of information as to generate a conversation which is fictitious and harmful for the construction that we have to understand as justice. And I will stop here because I think that I have speak way more than the time I had been allocated. It is a very fascinating speak. I think we could speak for another, but since we're running out of time, however, we have very good questions, and I would like to read them for you, and we won't have time to go through all of them, but it's always to read some just to have some reflection material. What happens in the case of disappearance cases that become trending topics, resource allocation for investigations that can be influenced by social pressure? How can we speak about the right to oblivion in cases that are very visible and public in nature? Discretion space is allowed by laws open opportunities up for social pressure to become a decisive factor. Well, anyone, if you could take 1 or 2 minutes to answer, I think that in general you agree, right? That this is a tool that has to be self-regulated. However, you also agree that it has some influence, and also this part of it, Alfredo, you spoke about this. We should not, well, what the legislators should not do, or judges should not do. The reality is that there is some influence, and as Anel was saying, we have this limited stage, and who has access to the microphone and is going to scream as it's loud. I don't know if someone would like to accept the challenge of answering in a couple of minutes. For disappearances, what happens? Well, very little, almost nothing. In terms of effective justice, when a case becomes very mediatic, of course, this is going to move the authorities to act. not just with disappearances, but with many others. Murders, very fast detentions, and the authorities show have an amazing efficiency in these cases. So the machine, the Justice Administration machine is moved because of the social impact. And yes, scandal moves things, and the noise on social media or people in general is going to move the authorities to act indeed. But oftentimes this is just an impasse, that is not the solution. We have had very serious disappearances, but not so long ago we were publishing about the topic of forced disappearances. We worked on over 1,600 files of investigation, and none was solved. No case made it to a trial. There is no sentence to people, and we have not built either the structure necessary, because we can identify, because we have this extraordinary number of disappeared people. Unfortunately, we do have some movement because of a very a specific case, but in here we're just trying to distract. It is just a diversion. We also published things about the army and money and confidential agreements, which we try to contain the victims in this case, and then that's the end of it. I agree with Arturo. The problem, well, I don't like to say problem, the crisis, the tragedy, the humanitarian tragedy of this country, with over 100,000 disappeared people officially acknowledged. That is, it's here where social media, the good side of social media can be seen. I do know not just one or two or three, several cases of how we have found living or dead people because of the cards that are start to be elaborated. This goes beyond our capacity of at every level of any aspect about which we can discuss, so we can end with this crisis. So the right to oblivion, I want to say that the right to oblivion does not exist. That's an invention of lawyer firms that mainly are aiming at erase some evidence of corrupt, and that's a whole topic for which we don't have the time to address, but we have the right to oblivion, the so-called right to oblivion. That's what it is. But this goes in the right sense to be an incident or to make justice evident. Of course, these are perfect means and appropriate means to do so. And the accountability here goes to individuals. I have always said, for good or for bad, we punish themselves at the best we or as we want. That's the message, my last message. One can decide what to say and what not to, and that's the question that we have all to make. How responsible our use of social media and what we publish will be there. Anel and then Lina, 1.5 minutes. So the streaming does not cut mid-sentence. Well, in these times of cancellation culture, someone was saying you have to make sure that you behave like a decent human being at all times, because you do not know when you are going to be recorded and then you're going to be cancelled on social media. And I would think that all of the authorities, public prosecutors, actors, judges, the police, the enforcement task, they should behave like good authorities, good judges, by complying with rules, because at all times, so all cases have the potential to be observed and to reach the public eye and to be questioned. I hope that we will get to that moment at which the authorities are also very concerned about their image and to comply with the rules. That's the point. Just follow the already established rules, and not just in some cases in which this is a famous YouTuber, the one involved, and or the cases in which we have an actor in a car accident. The rules are for everyone. Laida. Great. Well, I would like to say two things, one of which is in terms of the budgets available for the different types of crimes or offenses because of the social unrest. I think there is a clear difference between specialized officers that work on kidnapping cases and those officers devoted to disappearance cases. It's very sad to see that there is a topic of class, of lack of access, which is very evident and which concerns how there is a social perception that we can all be victims of a kidnapping, but we do not all feel that we can be the victims of a forced here. But we are not making a favor. We're not making anyone a favor here when we do not consider the whole seriousness as well as that bad institutional response, an equal institutional response, right? And the other thing that I would like to say, just as just like a call, like and like an idea to follow, on which to follow up, is that we have to protect the presumption of innocence in this way. We are made to go for the blood, to go for the sanctions. Psychologically, that's the way we are wired. And it's more common to see a viralization when someone said they're guilty instead of doing the same for someone when someone's innocent. So we have to protect judges who are doing the right thing in terms of establishing controls to the public prosecutor offices, to the president, to the federal state governors. We have to protect that presumption of innocence, and also in our speeches that it's not just to go and punish, but also to defend as well. Thank you very much. Well, thank you very much, Arturo, Laida, Alfredo, and El. This was a very interesting conversation. Thank you very much, Mexico Evalúa, to invite us to share this space. Thank you.
Vaya panel el que tuvimos en este momento, denominado redes sociales e impartición de justicia.
We had a great
Aplicación de la
panel
ley
on the
según
social
indignación
media
social.
and administration of justice,
Agradecemos a
application of
Patricia
justice
Dobeso,
according
Laia
to
Negrete,
social
Daniel
outrage.
Pineda,
We would
Arturo
like to
Ángel y
thank
Alfredo
our
Lecona
previous panelists
por compartirnos estas
for
visiones
sharing with us
sobre las redes
these
sociales y la
ideas
justicia.
on social media and justice.
Para finalizar la jornada de hoy,
To
tendremos
finish
el panel Justicia Transicional en el Mundo.
today's
Mecanismos de
sessions,
construcción
we
de
are going to
paz.
talk about transitional
Este
justice
panel
in the world,
será
mechanisms
moderado por
of
Ana Kurchenko,
establishment of peace.
coordinadora
This
local del
panel will
Instituto
be
de Transiciones
facilitated by Ana
Integradas, capítulo México.
Kurchenko, local coordinator of
En el panel
integrated
participará
transitions in
Marie-Claire Acosta Urquidi,
Mexico. We will have
académica y
Marie-Claire Acosta
defensora de derechos
Urquidi,
humanos.
professor and defender
Gerson
of human
Iván
rights.
Arias
We will also
Ortiz,
have Gerson Iván
director
Arias
para el diálogo
Ortiz,
social de la
Director
Comisión
for
de la
Social
Verdad
Dialogue
en
of the
Colombia,
Commission
y
for the
Carlos
Truth
Pérez
in Colombia, and
profesor
Carlos Pérez
investigador del
Ricard,
Centro de
the
Investigación y
researcher
Docencia
professor of the Center of
Le damos la
Investigation and
palabra a Ana Kurchenko.
Economic Teaching. We will give the floor to Ana Kurchenko. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for being with us today. It is a great honor for me to be here with us to facilitate this panel with the experts. I am Ana Kurchenko. I am the local coordinator for the Institute for Integrative Transitions in Mexico. We work in more than 10 countries with the objective of accompanying countries that are affected by conflict and violence in transition and negotiation processes towards an inclusive construction of peace. Today, we have this dialogue with these expert speakers, and the topic is transitional justice in the world, and this as a mechanism of construction of peace in different contexts. Some of the topics that our experts will be talking about are elemental and comprehensive and go through a very specific part of the Mexican context, and these are the topics of truth commissions and the processes of peace construction in areas of conflict. What are the experiences and the opportunities that this mechanism have? Also to think about a definition of peace, who defines peace and what types of peace exist and what we understand for peace. We also need to think about victims and the right of truth and memory that they have and the importance that these elements have in these transitions and these transition processes. And finally, the processes of conciliation and dialogue and where they fit in each of the contexts, especially in the context that our speakers will be talking about. Welcome, everyone. And with no further comment, I will give the floor to Gerson Arias, who is the Director for Social Dialogue for the Commission of Truth and Non-Repetition in Colombia. Gerson, thank you very much for being with us. Thank you, Ana. I would like to thank everyone for the invitation. In this first contribution, I would like to give a brief context of where I am going to be for this panel. We're talking about the Commission of Truth that started in Colombia in 2018. This is the second experience in terms of transitional justice. Years ago, we had an experience based in a negotiation of military issues where approximately 5,000 people, not all of them were paramilitary, made some contributions under a figure or an arrangement, a transitional arrangement. But I would like to talk about this element, which is the second experience, and it is related to a peace agreement with the FARC in Colombia, the armed forces in Colombia. This commission was created in 2017, and we started working in 2018 with 11 commissioners for the clearing out of truth since 1958 until 2016, with a universe of victims that in Colombia goes beyond 9.5 million victims. But I would like to mention very specific things about the context of what been working on for the last few years. Our initial mandate was of 3 years. Currently, according to a decision of the Constitutional Court, we will be working until next year. And we are going to use certain amounts of time for each topic. And this is a key ingredient in what we do, and how time has also been affected by different security conditions, obviously, and of course, because of the pandemic. But just for you to have an idea of the magnitude, right now with the Commission of Truth, with these 11 commissioners, we have almost 11 people working all over Colombia. And right now we have achieved 926 reports, 622 case studies. We have performed more than 14,000 interviews, and we have heard them because most of them are collective actions by indigenous communities. We have heard more than 37,000 people, indigenous people, and we have around 450 databases, which should give us a lesson. And we would need to think about the capabilities, the processing capabilities that we have. We are in 28 houses of truth. That's how we call our offices, the houses of truth, and they are already closing because we are reaching the final report. And then I think one of the variables that we have here in Mexico is talking about the truth that they had, is that these were victims from these groups of the state, and they were unheard, and we have reached 24 countries. And two last things is that we are part of the transitional agreement from a unit of search, and it is an extrajudicial area, and also the creation of peace. This is about having a commission of truth with a system that has different types of incentives. And we also have a mandate that is based in centrality, which is, please, Anna, let me know about the time. And I would like to mention some things related to this context about these key elements. And it's all the discussion that was done because of the peace agreement, but also in an autonomous way when this Truth Commission started working with 11 commissioners. And it was about why to have a commission of the truth. And I would say that we rescued the value of truth as a public good in a democratic society. This is something that is very clear for us. But also as a fruit of these discussions, this response or this answer might be different than it was 3 years ago, but I think it's very necessary to have a shared vision of why these things happened in these military conflicts in Colombia. And just by having clear answers about this and understanding that there are also victims, human victims, and that we still hear about them, understanding the why is related to that, but also the truth as a public good of the state in terms of peace construction. That's only possible if we translate that in measures that avoid this to be repeated. And there are still discussions in Colombia about it, but I want to leave this message. And the second thing that I would like to say based on this agreement and why to get a commission of truth in Colombia is to get the basic representation. The commission of truth, at least from the experience and the social dialogue that we have had more than 700 spaces of social dialogue. In spite of the pandemic, I think we cannot address all topics, but I think that's the first challenge of all these expectations, where clearly the follow-up of every case cannot be possible in this experience, because we're talking more about patterns and persistence factors. And something that is very clear and that is fundamental here is knowing that victims, but especially society, need to know what this is going to be for. People need to acknowledge that there were these awful situations, and we need to understand and we need to reduce the denial that exists in many sectors of the Colombian society, and also that we have non-repetition measures, that we cannot deny that there are actors that are performing this all over the place. And we also need to establish what are these non-repetition measures. I would like to say that, yes, from our experience, it's very decisive to have a deep conversation, and we need to talk about why we are doing a commission. And I think that the answer that we have after 3 years is to guarantee that this denial can be reduced and to establish that everyone has a minimum consensus that we cannot allow a violation to human rights. And I think that if we can understand this, we can solve anything else that we want to talk about. That's my first intervention. Thank you very much. Gerson, thank you very much. What you are saying is very interesting. Now I'm going to give the floor to Maria Clara Acosta. She is academic and investigator and researcher, and she is a reference nationally and internationally. Welcome, Maria Clara. Thank you, Anna. It is a great privilege for me to be here with you, to be able to listen to Gerson and Carlos as well, and address these topics that I think are very important, that in Mexico, we really need to have a deeper discussion on what truth commissions are and what transitional justice is, and also what are the conditions for transitional justice to be promoted in a country as ours. And I really celebrate that in this innovation panel, Justice Innovation Panel, we can address these issues. I would start by saying, what is a commission of the truth for? I think that Gerson just mentioned that it's for many things, mainly for clearing out a situation. And I would like to say, in Mexico, we are still living these awful situations in current times. And in order to establish a pattern of atrocities and violation to human rights, and where the ordinary institutions of justice have been incapable of addressing these issues, and in order to build a speech based on the facts that places victims at the core, that's how I would define a commission of the truth. And I would also say that it intends to build a different speech, a speech that is closer to what actually happened, that mentions the patterns of violence, of the violations to human rights, and also the perpetrators and the modus operandi that was used to commit these atrocities and these massive and severe violations to human rights. And that also allows that society reconciles. It's a way of being held accountable. I don't think that the mere fact of having a commission of the truth can lead to peace, but I do think that it's a first step to build a way of living with one another that is more inclusive and that is more civil. For the population, where the use of the force and violence is in a different place and with a different significance. I would leave my participation over there. But well, I can also say that Mexico has had experiences of commissions of truth And now we are going to start a new experience, and I hope that Carlos can give us a little bit more information about it. So far, we have had 2 local commissions of truth, one of them in the state of Guerrero and another one in Oaxaca. And it's very important to say that these truth commissions need to address specific terms. In the case of Guerrero, it was during the term of the Dirty War, in what we know as the Dirty War in Guerrero, that was during the 70s and by the end of the 80s, in the last century, that was very specific, in very specific places of the state. And it was the result, this war was the result of different movements from different communities, such as Lucio Cañabas and Genaro Vázquez Rojas. And in Oaxaca, we also had the experience of a truth commission that examined the events that took place in Oaxaca in 2006, where there was some sort of popular uprising, a civil movement led by the Apo in Oaxaca, and it was severely repressed, and it left a balance of severe human rights violations. I think those are 2 experiences of the truth commissions, and we have also had many mechanisms of truth seeking, such as investigation commissions. For many years, the Supreme Court applied that faculty they had of integrating these investigation commissions by the Supreme Court that investigated cases of severe violations to what we know as human rights, and that created very important and interesting reports. And currently we have 2 important exercises of truth-seeking. The one I already mentioned that was recent, which is the Truth Commission and the Search for Justice. And I don't remember the whole title because it's a very long title, but it's related to the clarification of the Dirty War and the Truth Commission in the case of Ayotzinapa, that, as many people know, it has not been cleared out. That would be my participation. Thank you very much, Mary Claire. It's very interesting. I will give the floor to Dr. Carlos Perez Ricard, who is also a professor and researcher, and he's one of the experts assigned for the commission, the Truth Commission for the violations of human rights between 1965 and 1975. Thank you very much. Thank you, Anna. It's a privilege for me to be here with us. We usually say that, but I truly mean it, especially because I think that we have a lot of things to learn from Colombia, especially from Marie Claire as well, who has been in this for more than 30 years. So I think since the 90s, maybe Anna and I hadn't even been born, and she was already part of many things that have been achieved. I think that we can say very few things about this great job. And the full name of the commission in which I was assigned is the Commission for Access to Truth, the Historical Clarification, and the Search for Justice to the Severe Human Rights Violations committed between 1965 and 1990. Maybe this title is as large as the ambitions that we have as a commission. Maybe I would have to explain what this commission is and maybe focus on the work that we are going to do, and which I may fit into my second participation. This is a forum of justice innovation, and it's very strange that I was called to talk about this when I work in something in the past. But I think that it's necessary to remember. But is it really better, or do we need to forget and close the wounds? Well, Priscilla Heiner wrote a very famous book, Unspeakable Truth, and I think that she nailed it when she said, and I quote, "The best road to move forward is a mixture between remembering and forgetting. And even if it's paradoxical, maybe a memory that makes forgetting possible. Sometimes the best way of closing wounds is by opening them again, because they were falsely healed and we need to still remove a previous infection. So we need to remember, and we are still on time. I like to think that the commission of which I am part, and I am talking only by myself, if it's not the last attempt, it's going to be the greatest project to clarify events committed during the period called the Dirty War, which has its peak point in 1971 and 1978. But the term where we are going to be digging into goes from 1965 to 1990, which is the long Dirty War. There are different debates about the correct name for it, if it's Dirty War or not. But, well, we will be focusing on 1965 to 1990, and it starts from a premise that talks specifically about the topic of this forum. I think we can support the following affirmation. The impunity from the past is what makes possible impunity in present. We are capable of identifying the patterns of the impunity in the past, and we will be able to dig into the impunity of the present. It's just not about clarifying because of the fact that we need to clarify. It's about establishing patterns and by the state and institutions and different actions that go beyond the state. And maybe the first argumentation that I will try to talk about in the next 4 minutes, and then I will talk about what the Commission is going to do. The Commission is part of something bigger. We are not inventing the wheel. We are going to acknowledge the previous efforts by other actors. Marie Claire is the best example of this, by other institutions and committees, a lot of efforts that were done in this country for the clarification of truth. Just to mention the 3 main parts, and Marie Claire mentioned one of them. In 1990, more than 30 years ago, the special program of alleged disappeared people that was established by the National Commission of Human Rights, a program that then derivated in a recommendation of this Commission of Human Rights to create a specialized district office. And then in 2012, they created an office with a longer name than the one of the commission that I am part of. And it's an institution that also had great ambitions, that failed in around 2006 and 2007 without having the real support of the president, because of many reasons that we could talk about. But as Marie Claire said, there are smaller projects, specifically the one in Oaxaca is one. The other one is the Truth Commission in the state of Guerrero, that out of a mandate from the state proposes to investigate cases of forced disappearing and violations of human rights. By understanding the complexity of these projects and learning from their mistakes and their good things, the 5 members of the committee, who are Ogelín Montaño, Abel Barrera, who is a social anthropologist, director of an organization that you know, David Fernandez Dávalos, Yaleira Garcia Aguirre, and myself, we are going to try to clarify the facts that happened between 1965 and 1990 and move forward and move towards mechanisms of justice. And I'm going to talk about that in my second intervention. Thank you very much for now. Carlos, thank you very much for your intervention. It was very interesting. We have many questions. Some of them are from our audience for you that talk about the importance. And I would like to talk about some things that I wrote down about your contributions. Gerson, I think it was very interesting what you said about how the Commission has brought a value to rescue the value of truth as a public good. I think that was very interesting. And I think that it's very valuable to go deeper into how this Commission has had a positive impact in this dimension in the society. And I also think that it's very important to highlight that the necessary shared vision on what happened in order to move forward. And it's also very interesting what Marie-Claire mentioned about building a speech based on the facts by putting victims at the core of it, and how this is the main objective of the Commission and how this is the first step of a larger process. And about what Dr. Carlos said, I think it's very interesting how he said that the new Mexican Commission is part of something bigger, and that they are not reinventing the wheel, but this is an important effort, which is also very valuable in order to learn from the previous lessons that were implemented. And also by having Gerson here, I think it's amazing to get to know the experiences in other countries and in other contexts that were also fruitful. So I would like to ask some of the questions from our audience. This is specific for Gerson, and it's what's the most difficult thing that the commissions in Colombia have had to face, and what would be the main recommendations for Mexico in that regard? The second one is specifically for Carlos. This idea of remembering to forget, can you mention how these memory exercises contribute to reconciliation? And then what conditions are required for the current Truth Commission to be a dialogue exercise as well as memory and reconciliation? And finally, if parts of the job of the Commission is to judge the responsible people, how are we going to face the structural impunity? And are there specific mechanisms for criminal prosecution, or are you going to leave the local and federal district attorneys? And these are some of the questions for you to contribute in your second intervention, and I will give the floor to Gerson. Thank you very much, Gerson. Please go ahead. Thank you, Ana. Thank you, Carlos and Marie-Claire. It's really an honor for me to share this space with you. I would try to be very specific, and maybe then we can continue with this conversation, but I would say that in very practical terms, I would highlight three things that made it very complex. We are finishing a process, and what we can highlight from the last 3 years is to act in a framework in which violence is still present. There is a great discussion if we talk about the continuity of these armed conflicts, and I am part of this process. And I would say that 9,000 men left the weapons and they left the war, and this is a historical situation in Colombia. And I think that what's coming is very different to what's coming. We need to do a commission without a definitive closing of violence, and I think this is also very important. We also have a Truth Commission in the change of government, with a government that does not acknowledge the peace agreement. Therefore, this is translated into acting in a scenario of polarization, which means taking into account what is happening in social media, in the in the media and in the streets. And there is a high degree of vulnerability on what we are doing, precisely because we are acting in this space.
And this concerns two variables: how this is going to continue being a listening amid the pandemic. And in here we have very serious things that happen to people. And just to use an actual example, when we admire virtual work, we found out that there were victims, for instance, women who had never spoken about their effects at home, and now they had to tell about them in front of a camera, and they were going to court to tell to tell them. And so many people did not want to go, not just because of security, but because of there was no knowledge in their family setting of what had happened. And of course, the topic of general conditions in which we have territories at the border with Venezuela, in which it has been very difficult to go over the work in practical and safe terms. And I would like as well, I think we are running out of time. Okay. Not yet, Herson. Okay. In terms of recommendations, elections, just based on the Colombian experience, for it to be similar to in a very autonomous way, but quickly. I spoke about the listening device, and here we have victims who have been listened to by a judge, by a peace court, and we asked what's the differentiation factor, and it was the quality of that listening. When we think about a specific example, many people were coming and listened to, and they were first asked about their fact, and we were asking about that same person who had been murdered or disappeared. And this radically changed things, and that person may have been listened to 4 or 5 times, and it was found out that the commission had listened to them differently. And I think this is really important, because from the social dialogue perspective, what we want is to listen to, and then we build, we clarify things, we conduct the patterns. But what's pivotal is out of that truth, I am a part of the world now, and I think it's clear when we have 13 mandated topics, and that's what I would like to highlight first. And number 2, I think it's important to conduct an endeavor to give an example of this, of what we are doing at Diálogo Social, to listen to the military forces, which is, if you've got something to say, tell us about it. And I can tell you today that throughout these 3 years, we have had several spaces with the public, with the enforcement forces and the army forces. It has not been easy, because there is a lack of trust, and I can speak openly here, because but it was different. It was necessary to incorporate their voice, and for doing that, it was important to design something. Without a doubt, it's not the same proportion, but we have enforcement force victims, and we received from almost 93 reports of the enforcement forces. But what we have to say is that we facilitated. Maybe you will not share the feeling of what we have in the report, but I can say that the public enforcement took part in the process, and this is very important, being able to identify those stakeholders who do not acknowledge or do not want to legitimize the commission. But Carlos, I would say, like, let's not stop in the effort. We can think that they are not going to be speaking, but what we are living here, it's a continued effort. Then we have another sector, the private and business sector, like a social dialogue. The main factor of this is that we must have the less possible sectors that were not part of this. And then methodology, just as a choice. And here we have a methodological instrument, but it's clearly our conclusion, and is that today this methodological is going to be there at the end of our mandate, because conditions change. We can have some bets, but definitely a document can tell us what's the methodology of the commission, and it's going to be built at the end. It's part of experience 3. Differential factors, and I'm going to mention just some here. A specialized work group, I think this is really important. Ethnic communities, and also something really important was how this was felt in the territory. So that's why we undertook deployment, of course, with limited resources for the clarification of the truth, with a commission where possible to be established for access to information. I think there is a challenge here. We signed agreements with the different entities, including the public enforcement agencies, as is stated by our mandate. And this is very sensitive, and we have to assume this, even if it's something really obvious, the responsibility to handle this, how we're going to create access rules. Again, our example is that we made this through an agreement that was difficult at the beginning, but I think that this is part of with this concerns just specific facts linked to due protection and requests. And finally, we have an advisory council that tells us there are context things over here you can go with it. They're not limiting us, but I think these are important diverse voices that go from the private sector all the way to historians and international members, and this helps a lot to have a point of reference. And we have a mandate of acknowledgement, clarification, and we found that it was important to have a pedagogical element to explain the scope we have as Commissioner for the truth, and we can give the truth its right. But in here we have a remedy process that has lasted 4 years. And it's important to have clarity, enough clarity. And also we endeavored to translate this into different languages and taking into account the ethnic communities, the farming communities, for them to know clearly what the work by the Commission means. And something that is pivotal for me is that if there is a destination point which can be assimilated by interacting people, and that's recommendations. If we look backwards, and I say this respectfully, without doing this, it's going to be very difficult to agree on everything. As I was saying, I think what's so important is to say that, yes, there were state disappearances, extrajudicial disappearances, actions, and like any future commission should not deny this. And that those recommendations must be appropriated, and we've got 2 ways for this, and this I'm going to finish. First, what's the association of those recommendations we're making, or the findings of the investigation. But above all, what Carlos was saying, I add to that, from Diálogo Social in Colombia, we have a huge amount. 2 or 3 years ago, we have a Commission for the Truth for the Pacific route of women. We have a lot of exercises, and if we do not start by acknowledging this, it's going to be very complex that at the institutions beyond the rotation of heads, Marie Carlos, there are people who have better than this, and maybe this is no ego, but there are people who have been thinking about how not for this to repeat for 20 years, 30 years, so we have to guarantee a social dialogue process, because it has a lot to say. And in the end, I would say that we're doing all of this from a perspective, and this is not just a victim-focused report. This has to be a report for society, and We have witnesses, responsible people, and solitary people who return look somewhere else in the society. Do not tell us just about the atrocities, but people and how people within the conflict made big things. And I'm going to use the words of Gonzalez Sanchez. This has to be a societal report. Center on the victims. That is understood at a school, at a university, that a household knows. For me, that's the core idea. Thank you very much. Now I will give the floor to Marie-Claire. Someone sent a specific question for you, which goes, in Mexico, we know your engagement for extraordinary dispute resolution. What are the elements that have to be there in the commission? So this is not just a paper. Thank you very much for the question. What are the elements? Well, there are many questions, and these have been publicly expressed by experts and human rights defenders about the commission structure. Because this is a commission where different federal government agencies participate. All of them are very important for the commission subject. And then we have an experts group that Carlos has just described. However, the experts group has one vote, and every agency has a vote. That has been the reason why we have had so many discussions. I hope that Carlos could tell us how they are going to be working under such circumstances. Another thing about which I am concerned about the commission is the actual extent of access to the perpetrators' files, because we know who they were. In terms of a government repression that led to this war, and in the end, the army. How will the commission get full access to that information? Because we have antecedents. The Commission for the Truth of Ayotzinapa has faced serious problems to obtain information by the Ministry of Defense of Mexico. And this is a topic that is very concerning. Another topic, I celebrate the creation of this commission, and in spite of all the possible limitations that have just been signaled and which are valid, this is a very important endeavor. And as one of the victims, surviving victims, or the daughter, the survivor of this war, said at a meeting where this topic was discussed, so this is our last opportunity, and you have spent, and several years have passed by from the time of the facts, and many of the witnesses of the perpetrators of the victims are very old already, and they can die at any time. So this is the opportunity that we have to clarify this, to clarify these facts. But this also presented a problem. These are facts that for a good share of the society are very remote in nature. And since we had such a persistent criminalization of the dirty war victims, there is a huge endeavor to end this narrative. And I think that these are situations that this commission is going to be faced with, and I'm going to stop here for the time being. But I think that human rights organizations and those of us who work on justice and accountability in Mexico, and on the need of democratic rule of law that we do not have. It's our obligation to accompany this commission and to contribute with as much as we can for it to work. Thank you very much, Mary Claire. Now I will give the floor once again to Carlos Perez Ricard. Go ahead. Thank you very much, Anna. Thank you very much for the questions. We have a huge challenge here. Indeed, we do. The bull that we are facing, maybe we have not gauged it appropriately. This is a huge challenge. I will start by saying this. Any mechanism that can have been generated, that is going to be generated, is going to be limited face to the size of the bull we have in front of us. And for this, we will need a lot of things. We will need the support of the international community. Hassan, I'm going to accept a proposal on the one hand for the curve, for the learning curve to be flatter, so we can learn fast and not to make all of the mistakes, to learn from your mistakes, from your errors, and also to make a pressure when this is needed, when engagements aren't respected, when we see internal obstacles, we will need the international community. And the same goes for the Mexican civil society. I understand the problems that we have had between the government and the civil society. In Carlos Perez regard, both the civil society and the international experts will always find an open dialogue for dialogue. Mary Claire, I can tell you this, and I also greet everyone who has seen with skepticism the composition of our commission. In 4 minutes, I will tell you about what the commission will do. And I think that there have been some misinterpretations of the commission's composition and work. It is the result of a long struggle of over a year of conversations that have had a set of collectives, the Assembly of Collectives, as it is called in Spanish, with the Ministry of the Interior, with the subsection of Human Rights, to create a plan for the truth, the memory, and the promotion of justice. This plan, which is a macro plan, with the different 5 mechanisms, 5 parts, that are going to represent its works. One for this, we have a commission for the truth and historical clarification. And the 5 of us are part of this mechanism. We are fully independent and autonomous for this, but of course we will need the government support. Otherwise, no commission of the only 25 commissions that I have been able to review can work. If not without the budget support, with the support of being left to what you consider, what you see, what you see fit. But we are fully autonomous, and we have 5 votes and 5 people in it. We have the work of access to information, of access to files. We have the huge work, and I'm going to say it plainly, to declassify finally the Ministry of Defense's files. The president's engagement is that we have to abuse of this evil, which is the support of presidentialism. Well, the president has an engagement and will publicly engage to help us in this way. At the second point, and yes, in 2 minutes, the Committee for the Promotion of Justice. Yes, it's the 5 of us and 6 other institutions that are going to be helping us and working with us. The Ministry of Finance, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but also the National Commission of Research, the Executive Commission of Assistance to Victims, and the people who are at the head of these, I respect them a lot. The Nations and General Archives and the Sub-Ministry of Human Rights. This committee for the promotion of justice, among many other things, will create a specialized Attorney General's office to bring all of the cases of mass and to move towards a justice plan. And we have discussed about this very little. And here we also have state institutions, and also we have got a vote in the first mechanism, and in the second one we are participating and helping these other institutions. We have a third point, which is the research plan in life, and also in dead, I mean, people, living people, and dead people, and disappeared people. So that's why we need to work necessarily with institutions, among which the National Commission of Research. And also we have considered for the fourth point, compensation and a remedy mechanism, a restorative justice mechanism, which is comprehensive in nature, to the community and not just to individuals, that can meet the political needs that many people who were disappeared had. And of course, we need the cooperation of the Minister of Finance, of the Executive Commission of Assistance to Victims. And the fifth point, and I'm going to finish with this, the creation of a law of memory that propose the execution of actions for memory and non-repetition. So the work of this commission, which would last all the way up to September 2024, can later on be institutionalized in a memory law that will continue the commission's work. We will not find everything throughout these 2.5 years, but we can set the foundations for there to be a memory law that later on can continue with the work of the commission. And so we can quite likely in another mandate, in another period, extend the commission's work later on all the way up to in the 90s and to the 21st century. This is another destination. Of course, we have as a goal the declassification of files. I'm very interested to have access to those files, and for future generations and researchers and others to be the ones really investigating and clarifying this. We are going to have a report for the society and the victims. This is not like a 1,600 page document with a mistake, of course, but we'll only have the foundations for future investigation. And we'll close by saying that whether we ask for your trust vote, that you allow us to, well, we have lots of limitations, structural, conjunctural, but we're going to be working with honesty, with solidarity, and above all, acknowledging the work that has been conducted by others and the work that is being conducted outside Mexico. Thank you very much, Anna, and this is how I will be concluding my participation. Thank you very much, Carlos. We are getting to the close of our session. So I'm going to propose a question here that was made from the public for Hassan, and later I will give the floor in the same order. First Hassan, then Marie-Claire, and then Carlos for your closing remarks of less than a minute. Thank you very much, Hassan. In the framework of what you said before, what are the necessary preconditions in society for the Commission's result to be for the society as a whole and not just institution-centered result? Thank you. And please, would you have less than a minute? Great. Very quickly, this concerns a remark that I had. Let's think about the new generations. And as you know, the new generations, well, when we think about them, we can have differences, but also we have work with boys, girls, and adolescents in two ways. First, we need to know what they felt, what they lived, what they know about this. We have just conducted a survey. Of course, they did not live the facts, but I think we also have to focus on the impacts, right, Carlos and Marie-Claire? I think many of these young people have victims at home, and we worked on that, and we have to think from day zero, Carlos, the formats we conducted a very strong work here. We have a final work of 12 chapter in terms, and I think that we are very similar in many Latin American countries with the capacity. We have very low literacy levels, and we are using different formats because we're thinking about those new generations, and we have new generations that are used to watching 2 to 3 minutes of video. So we're thinking about, Anna, now with regards to your question, how we can find our appropriate formats. Number 2, it's clear. And thank you, Carlos, for speaking about this. You spoke about this last opportunity, and this, we are convinced about this. And this is a new principle for societies. And if we consider this in this way, well, we have 444 databases that are going to be at the service of the society on a platform. And finally, we are aware of the fact that can be politically incorrect, and that's the victims know the truth, but they know a part of it. And I have to focus on how that other part that they do not know, because as West decided in other spheres, we can tell them that's our contribution. And that's why I'm thinking about formats and conducting a specific work with them. But above all, to say this as a new principle, rather than a closing of the last opportunity, depending on the context. Thank you very much, host. And Mary Claire, you have got 1 minute. You're muted. Sorry. I want to take back something that Hassan just said, and that's impacts, not just psychological and social impacts. For the victims' offspring, and I'm speaking about the dirty war in Mexico, but also I think that this commission for the clarification of the dirty war in Mexico is a pivotal step. So then we can move towards the clarification of the very serious crisis of violence and human rights violation consequences, which is mass and in nature. We are going through a human rights crisis. And I'm not saying this, and this has been said by agencies like the Inter-American Commissioner of Human Rights. And for us to understand and clarify the reason for this war to be there, not war, but of this situation which was generated by this policy of war against drug trafficking, we need necessarily to know what happened in the previous century, because that's the heritage that led to the situation and to the serious impunity that we suffer in Mexico. I will stop here. Thank you very much, Mary Claire. Carlos, go ahead, 1 minute. Again, I'm going to retain impacts, first with Mary Claire and Hassan. We have to focus on the fact not just of forced disappearances because of political reasons, but also how the state fought to disappear vulnerable people, presumed people. That's the only way in which we are going to be able to link past to present violences. And this is going to be a historiographical impact, the way in which we understand how the state related to society as a whole, not just with those who have a political flags, but as a whole. And the second impact, that's the pedagogical effort. If this commission does not bear in mind the youth, the children, and thinks that for them the dirty war does not exist, and what happened in the 20th century, well, we will have failed. And also we have to consider the social impacts and the pedagogical ways to access this. I'm going to close this. Thank you very much, Mary Claire Hassan. I'm going to be personally contacting you, and thank you for the organizers for the invitation to be here. Thank you very much, Carlos. And this is how we're going to be closing such an interesting and valuable panel. Thank you very much, everyone, for having been with us today, the panelists. Thank you for your valuable time and for your expertise. That without a doubt enriched such a valuable debate. Thank you, Mexico Evaluate. And thank you to the Friedrich Hellman Foundation. And thank you very much. Thank you. Really, thank you very much. Thank you, Anna. Thank you for the invitation. A pleasure, Mary Claire, Carlos, person Carlos. Thank you. Here we go. Thank you, Anna. Thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you.
Agradecemos a Ana Kurchenko.
Muchas gracias. Ya no había hablado porque todavía se estaba transmitiendo, pero gracias.
Carlos Pérez.
Un abrazote.
Bueno, un abrazo. Mil gracias.
Sobre transicional en el mecanismo de acción de paz. Y bien, con esta actividad llegamos al cierre de la jornada de hoy. Tuvimos una jornada muy interesante, con paneles que abordaron distintas perspectivas y ámbitos de acción de la justicia. El día de mañana será el tercer día de este segundo Foro Nacional de Innovación en la Justicia. Les invitamos a conectarse el día de mañana y a interactuar a través de nuestras redes sociales, en Facebook, en Twitter, Evalúa, y a través del sitio oficial del Foro Innovación en la Justicia.evalúa.org. Que tengan muy buena tarde.